Hi all, we had our first World Championship candidates decisive game yesterday on the 6th. So Topalov was playing white, he was the first victim, and he was playing against the US champion Gata Kamsky. So Topalov slightly higher rated on the FIDE scale, 2775. Kamsky is 2732. So knight f3 was played, the reti, but it quickly transposes into a kind of Grunfeld, but without white having played d4. And usually this would favour white a little bit more, I think, because white is without the usual structural damage which occurs in the mainline Grunfeld positions with the isolated a pawn. In fact, the knight retreats to b6, giving white potentially, a nice centre with pawns like here and here. d4 is used, and then bishop comes out, and it looks as though white's got a comfortable position, but the white queen is subject to attack, and that's made use of. But it parks on a3, and you might think that's a little bit odd. And is it also on a3 provoking just simply knight c4? That's a good question actually. What would happen if knight c4 here? If knight c4 here, simply queen b4, hitting b7. If the knight retreats, e4, and white's fine. So the queen's okay for the moment on a3 apparently. Engine off for a bit. Knight c6. And now white, Topalov, I don't know if this was preparation or something. Looks a little bit risky, his next move, casting queenside. From an instructive point of view, when you castle queenside, there's a few more responsibilities. The king, when it's on the king side, it has potentially less weaknesses around it, and here the queen might be subject to tempo gain later on. So this is quite a large front to defend compared to when you castle king side. It would just be like this area. So there's a bigger area, a bigger castle to maintain. So I don't know. It looks a bit risky. So knight d5. And now Topalov plays bishop g3. You see, knight d5. If knight takes bishop d5, there's a good bind on e4. There's pressure on a2, and maybe something like a5 and knight b4 would victimize the a2 pawn, which just demonstrates, what I was saying. that basically it's a bigger castle to kind of maintain all the potential weaknesses like a2 than if you castle kingside. And now, you see, with this next move, bishop g3, there is a tactical opportunity to hijack that diagonal now with bishop h6 check. But you might think, well, what's the point of bishop h6 really? If white can just play e3, is there a real point to it? And Topalov might be thinking, well, h4, h5 is going to gain a tempo. That's now a target on the H file. So what's really going on? Isn't that sort of playing into white's hands? That one of the benefits of casting queenside, if the opponent's going to castle kingside, is that you can tear open the H file, use your rook, which is usually not developed so easily just by moving a pawn. So if there is any benefits, it's going to be the H pawn attack. So does bishop h6 really make sense? Well, okay, let's see what happens. a5. So there's immediate, implications that black is in no hurry at all to castle. Given, he's given a target potentially. He's in no hurry. He's saying, maybe a2 is a bit vulnerable. h4. Now knight cb4 again saying, a2 is vulnerable. h5. So white is saying h6 is vulnerable and a tempo gain. But does black need to worry at the moment? All he does here is play the move c6, and you might be wondering, hold on a sec, isn't black actually threatening something concrete here? Let's just check this with Houdini. Is knight c6 on to try and win the a2 pawn? Well, apparently this is harmless. Check. White would be much better apparently with king b2, because the knight's kind of stranded now. And I think knight b4 you can just like take it safely, and there's nothing to fear. There's not enough bits really to make any exploitable weaknesses count here. Check, just king c3, and white's still safe enough. So engine off there. Tying up the machine a bit anyway. So instead c6, keeping it steady, keeping the pressure on, maintaining the tension, you know, keeping all the options open for the attack here. But white is still thinking, you know, maybe h6, bishop is vulnerable, so takes. And how does white though get coordination here? Particularly this guy. Is it a kind of spectator piece? Even though it's on a nice diagonal, is it really doing anything from there? Maybe the e5 square is useful for white, but one of the moves coming up for black seals off e5 actually. And if the rooks are not connected, can white actually build pressure on the h-file? I mean, does he really want to like move this and then try and double? You know, what is the attacking plan for Topalov here? But this next move kind of highlights, you know, he hasn't got an interest in simply trying to double on the h-file. And it would seem black can make that look academic anyway in various ways. If rook h2, maybe just f6, put the king here and bishop g7 to defend the rook, and then the queen will have been in contact with that square as well for recapturing if necessary on h8. So doubling on the h-file doesn't seem that effective here. In fact, I wonder if, you know, bishop e2 is even considered a good move here. Topalov did go drastically wrong in this game. Actually, bishop h2 and rook h4 are given, but rook h2 to try and double up rooks. Queen c8. Apparently black's better, but rook h4 apparently is a move as well. Now if f6, see, rook h4 actually benefits white by controlling e4, so knight e4 is possible here. So that's interesting, but what is actually going on positioning? I don't really know. It's complicated, such a mess, this position. Okay, so rook d2 though, it doesn't seem to imply to me a build-up plan on the h-file. So maybe Topalov is instead trying to keep control of d3 and c2 of that rook there. And maybe later, I don't know, maybe he was thinking later, it looks totally out of the question to aim for f3 because of these guys on e3. So I don't really know. Rook d2, strange move. We have to see, ideally, both players getting interviewed about the game to get their real thoughts about why they did certain moves. Okay, but it's interesting that he didn't want to maybe try and use the h-file. It looks as though it's academic. If black's not going to castle here, then maybe there's no point. In fact, black obviously he makes the intention that he's going to park the king on f7 with his next move, and he's cutting away this e5 square from white. This diagonal is not exactly open for exploitation, so f6 is not really a problem for weakening that diagonal. Knight e4, as though maybe, you know, c5 could be useful. b6, so sealing off c5 as well. So that's interesting, kind of protecting key squares. Black is in a position, it seems, a strong position, to just prevent white from doing anything active here. So bishop e2, and now queen c8. So queen c8, well, it's x-raying the king, it's preparing c5, it's got some logic to it. Trying to get maybe to white's king. Rook h4 now. Okay, now rook h4. So maybe the rook can be used usefully one day for a battery of rooks if the other rook wanted to go, you know, there, but that looks far too slow. What's the real intention of rook h4? Supports e4, the knight on e4. Anyway, so king f7. Now rook d1. So maybe there's a hint, you know, the rooks are going to be potentially doubled as an option anyway, at least. But g5. Now it seems white is going backwards. So the rook's chased back, and now the knight is chased back. So black really does seem to have the upper hand here. And there's a highly tactical engine move here, knight a2, mentioned by Houdini. Should we just go into that? Knight takes e3, and apparently black would have been better in this continuation. But I don't know. So 2 pawns, giving up the knight to get the rook. So rook and 2 pawns, but it opens up this bishop. So it's an interesting tactic, knight a2, but it wasn't used. Instead, c5 looks more intuitively logical. Just tear open a line to white's king. Okay, so who said these games weren't exciting? Just because they were all drawn yesterday. This is really Topalov. Unfortunately, he's the first person to really try and play exciting, attacking chess. Casting on the queen side. But it doesn't seem to have the support of his position. The piece coordination is lacking. Black's got an easy time with his king safety and the scope of his pieces. In particular, this bishop, stop Houdini, is having a nicer time, enjoyable time with a target on c1, and so is the queen. They're having a great time, black's pieces, whilst white's pieces are attacking, thin air at the moment. So d takes c5. Maybe Topalov is frustrated. He's opening another road to his king, and now this knight can be chased back. So here white gets annoyed. He can't move that knight back. I think it will be terrible if he moves it back. It seems as though he's forced to sack the exchange. Alright, let's check this. Knight c3. Rook h6 is the engine move. If knight c3, it's probably a disaster. It is, in fact, hugely better for black. Queen takes c5 simply. There's multiple threats, like knight c3, knight a2 is real threats. But also, maybe knight a2, no. Or just knight takes c3 is strong and queen c5. So there's all sorts of strong options. So this exchange sack was virtually forced. But black is obviously clearly better. White is getting in a check. But black doesn't need to be worried. Just king f8, knight e6 now, queen e6. The queen's good on e6 again, kind of eyeing a2. It's like white is being sat on with his king as a fixed target. Bishop c4, as though he's, Topalov is putting some stuff in the way, protecting some key squares. But he has gone the exchange down, and black has got easy usage of that c file still against his king. So bishop f8, it's looking pretty grim. Rook f6. How can white defend this position when his king's getting shredded on the c file? You would think he's going to have to move his king soon. So e4, and it's ignored now the threat on the knight. Rook c5, pinning the bishop, which means that e takes d5. Okay, now queen takes d5. So even though black sacrificed a piece, he's threatening to win 2 pieces here. And queen c3, there's probably knight a2, because if bishop a2, rook c3. So it's looking nasty. So this is a critical position. So Gata Kamsky's just sacked a piece. Is there any way of defending c4? If queen b3, check this, just b5 apparently. What if the king just moved? Is giving up the 2 pieces really, really bad? I'm sure it is, because actually the knight's pinned to the rook. So this is actually diabolical, this position. The move chosen to try and defend was b3, which is probably the best try, but it's absolutely winning for black with this next move, which basically forks f4 and c3. This next move, queen d4. It's really embarrassing, in fact. A 2-7-7-5. His king's getting totally torn to shreds. If the bishop moves, there's queen c3 and queen c2. And this is what happened. Bishop moves, queen c3 check, and white's forced to resign. He's losing an entire rook because of this queen c2. Unfortunately. So this is just overwhelming, like, material advantage, etc. and the attack rages on. So I don't know, it looks as though Topalov, unfortunately, in trying to play interestingly, he left himself with a very precarious fortress to try and defend. It's much more difficult sometimes to have king safety when you castle on the queen side, especially with these bits continually lurking over your king, like A2, etc. So king safety and the piece coordination of white is lacking, and it seems black is having a great time targeting that poor white king, not only on this diagonal but just directly on the c file as well. It's strange, okay, that he never got the chance, or he never used c5 as an option, but you know, was there ever time like king b1 as an option? Because king b1, you know, taking here and then queen c2 it can't be allowed. So there was never much time for that. So c2 was a constant concern, as well as a2. And here, you know, the position's so good that black can afford to sacrifice a piece here. So Kamsky, when playing rook f6, obviously has to calculate this piece sacrifice now. He just plays rook takes c5, offering the knight, because he knows this position is not defendable. He's going to get his material back with much more. There's no defense here. So this really shows the dangers of casting queenside. I think maybe that's the instructive theme. So queen d4, and after check, white resigns. So a very, very exciting game. Good on Topalov for making it exciting. It's just a shame the attack, the combination of his pieces, they weren't working together with great energy. I think one of the Grandmaster commentators on YouTube, which Danielson, he talks about energy and piece coordination. Your pieces need to have this energy flow of coordination with each other. They need to be in harmony. And he's so right. And here it seems white's pieces were disjointed, as well as having greater responsibility when casting queenside for maintaining a bigger realm of the fortress. You know, all of these squares c2 and a2, there's a bigger area of responsibility. It just seemed to all go pear-shaped. The way black played it though was masterly. I think a third just passed over this game. If you look at the way black played it, not, you know, routinely casting kingside, of course, but also more novelly using this bishop h6 and making it work with the later f6 and king f7s if needed, you know, was very masterful. Showed all basically black's trump cards without exposing any of the advantages really of casting queenside. So, and unfortunately it culminated now in a piece sack as well, with this this rook f6 move, you know, not minding about sacrificing a piece. A curious thing, by the way, here is it seems as though also rook f6 was designed to stop e4 because it takes an attacking the bishop. Shall we just try and answer that question as well? Why wouldn't fe work here? Let's just ask one more question tactically. If fe, apparently that's a good move as well. F takes e. That was playable. The more simple fe. It seems, you know, that's strange as well. Rook f6 maybe tried to discourage e4. It's played anyway. So what's the idea here from white? I don't know. You know, bishop e3, black's still clearly better. I'm not really sure what the idea here is. So that's perfectly okay as well. But rook c5 is actually technically the strongest move here. Rook takes c5. I guess the difference is fe bishop e3. Well, the rook c5 is not there pinning the bishop. So that's great. That's so energetic the way that was played. Actually, even though he was, you know, trying to stop e4 with that perspective, that fe hitting bishop, but rook c5, saying, okay, I'm going to sack a piece anyway. Forget that I played rook f6. He ignores his own prophylaxis. This is much more clinical. This position, because of b5 to queen b3, queen c3, knight a2. There's no defense. So this was horrible. Queen d4 just going in. The weakness of the last move, weakening that c3, just invading with queen c3 and then queen c2, because the rook is only protected by the poor king, which isn't a brilliant defender of bits and pieces when it can be checked and driven away. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.